All right, so if you're new, my name's Andy. I was going to say I'm one of the pastors. I actually am the interim pastor of this church for the month of July. Well, you guys have a phenomenal pastor named Brad Sarian who is on sabbatical. So give it up for them. Yep, they're not here. Don't worry, not weird hero worship. Want to honor them. They're getting a much-deserved time of rest and reflection and renewal to, Lord willing, bless you guys for a very long time on the other side of this, but coming from a place of freshness and renewal. So we're in a series called Healthy Relationships where we're learning to give and receive the love of Jesus. 2 weeks ago, Grant Clark, one of the pastors from San Diego, he came up here and he kicked off the series by looking at the Great Commandment and the Great Commission and this idea that we're called to love the Lord our God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourself, which is no small thing. And then from there, last week, I looked at this idea of Jesus and the love that Jesus calls us to, which is really kind of an anchor verse for the series, which I'm going to read from right now, John 13, verses 34 through 35. Jesus with his disciples before he's betrayed, shortly before he goes on trial to go to the cross, he says this, he says, I give you a new command, love one another. Just as I have loved you, you are also to love one another. By this, not your worship music, by this, not a killer kids ministry with a rock climbing wall, a pirate ship, and a non-creepy clown. By this, not your Instagram and your branding, they will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. And so this idea that Christians should be known for their love, but not just love for anybody, love for one another, which is kind of wild. And I mentioned this last week, but one of the leading causes of deconstruction, anecdotally in my experience, almost every time, though, has been people seeing Christians not love each other. And they go, if they don't love each other, then the claims Jesus made must not be true. Which actually is true to the logic of this passage, the inverse of it. If they'll know that Jesus was sent by the Father and that he is God, come to reconcile us to him, by the way that we love one another, if we don't love one another, people will start to doubt that that's a reality. If these people who claim him do this, then what's that going to look like? So this is super important. But again, we're not all there. How many guys are intimidated by the command to love people like Jesus? Anybody? Cool. Okay, the rest of you guys, I'm worried about you, okay? So now here's why. Because there's a lot that keeps us from loving like Jesus, giving and receiving the love of Jesus. Now, last week we started a mini-series on what keeps us from loving like Jesus. And I had a very intense preacher outline. I had 6 Fs. I had 5 Fs and a PH. My wife's like, you overdid the alliteration. You overdosed. You died up there. So I'm not going to go back to those. But one of the things we do need to talk about the things that keep us from loving, which can be kind of a bummer because no one likes to acknowledge where our starting point is. But here's the reality. To move in any noble or worthwhile direction, we have to be honest about where we're currently at and where we're currently facing. Jackie and I, Jonathan Lopez, Matt and Bithia, we were in Denver a couple weeks back. There was a family of churches retreat for our Denver church. Again, they've got about 80-ish people. 80-ish people, and to fly them all to California for the one that we normally do in SoCal would be a little too much. And so we decided to take the retreat to them and help them feel like they're a part of this bigger picture, because they are. And so we brought out a team of about 20 from all the different churches. And there was a girl from one of the churches, a woman from one of the churches, a friend of mine, and she was walking to the chapel. And again, it's about 2 hours outside of Denver. We're at a campground, and it's beautiful. I've never seen the Rocky Mountains in person before. I never thought I would see anything like this, and it was stunning. And this gal, she's walking up, and she's like, man, this is humbling. And I just kind of thought to myself, yeah, no, it is. It's beautiful, whatever. And then a little while later, she was walking up again. Later on that day after dinner, she's like, this is really humbling. And I was like, I know, God's creation's just, we're so small, he's so big, And she's like, no, humbling how out of shape I am. I'm walking up these steps. I can't breathe. You know what I mean? Now, it's humbling to admit where we're starting from, but all of us are starting from somewhere. And if we're not honest about our starting point, we're going to hurt more people. Because all of us are a liability in relationships, whether we know it or not. We all have a thing inside of us and the things that we do. And if you don't know what you do, ask people that are safe for some feedback. But there's ways that we can hurt each other, trigger each other, sin against each other, all that stuff. And so we've got to get at the root of what's there. Because at the end of the day, our goal, again, is to obey that great commandment. And the reality is, I mentioned this last week, we've all been impacted by the fall when sin entered the world and everything got broken, including us. And we're all struggling to love like, we're being redeemed into people who love like Jesus, but we're not there yet. And so I talked a lot about the different ways that we struggle to love. Last week, again, I mentioned sin or being sinned against, kind of wounds. I mentioned lies we believe and all that kind of stuff. What I failed to do is talk about how they go together. And so to help with that, I created this little, I'm not, full disclosure, I am not good at art or presentations or anything like that, but I have a slide. It says the enemy's script for your life. You guys have that? You see that? So we've got these arrows, and so there's two of these I want to look at. The first one is there is an enemy of your soul and what he would like your life to look like. Okay. Now on the far left, you've got wounds, aka trauma, and those are pain points, moments of pain you've experienced, physical, spiritual, relational pain. They are not your faults. Now, they could happen from just living in a fallen world. It could be an accident. But I want to highlight specifically wounds that come from other people, since this is a series on relationships. So we experience a person abusing us or abandoning us or betraying us, or all types of things. And then what happens is, there are these messages, there's these lies we live under. You see that second from left. And the lies we live under are messages that we take on because of our pain. And usually they're from the enemy of our souls. Scripture says that Satan is like a lion who's prowling around seeking whom to devour. And what you need to know is lions don't play fair. Lions are prison rules all the time, okay? Lions look for the babies, they look for the olds, and they look for the sick and the weak. Those who are most vulnerable, they take advantage of them. They just go in. It's raw violence and power, and they do what they want to do. And so the key idea is the enemy comes for us when we're most vulnerable. He is ruthless. He is no holds barred. He doesn't care. And when we're abused or we're abandoned, he comes in, he tells us, often when we're little, but it can be when we're older. When we're little, it's even more damaging because our brain isn't developed enough to know the difference. But let's say your little boy and your dad leaves the family. He goes, you're a leavable person. You always will be. You're abused physically or in other ways. And he goes, you deserved this abuse, or you were complicit in it. That jacks you up. And then that leads to a third move, which I'll call vows, or these are not lies about you. These are lies you live out of because of the pain you felt in the first two. These are almost like callings on your life you never agreed to, you agreed to, but you didn't realize it. Things like, I will never, or I will always. I will never trust anyone. I will never let anyone know the real me. I'll never share what I think. I'll never say no. I'll never stop working. I'll never feel this pain again. I'll never disappoint anyone. I'll never let anyone disrespect me. Or I will always make sure everyone's happy with me all the time. Some of us are living that out. How's that going? It's hard. I'll always fit in. I'll always be excellent. I'll always feel good. I'll always have enough money. I'll always be important. And one of the things that starts to happen is this: if you live out of these vows, by the way, you can't love people well. Because again, the world hurts you, the enemy lies to you about your pain, and then your flesh comes in with those vows. I'm going to be self-righteous, self-dependent, self-reliant, self-ish, self-worship, self-absorbed. I'm going to take care of me. It's not a recipe for love, right? But all throughout the storyline of Scripture, whenever Israel starts to trust in themselves, they don't just trust in themselves, they trust in themselves and they look to a false god, like the god of fertility or the god of rain or the god of crops or the god of military victory. And they start to, over and over, they move towards idolatry. And so we move towards idolatry, towards things like approval or comfort or power or control. And so we look to people to give us what only God can, or we try to control things besides us, or we're enslaved to never having enough money. And then the fruit of that is what we'll call strongholds. The fruit of your life is full of things like lying and overcommitment and addiction and burnout and sexual sin. And sometimes, not always, there's times this is not your fault at all, but there's times where it is our fault. It's financial struggles, or loneliness or depression or anxiety or death. You guys see that? That's the enemy's script for your life, fam. He's here to steal, kill, and destroy. On the other hand, Jesus has a redemption of our story if we encounter him. And I think we have that slide too. You guys see it? Did it switch? Okay. So we've got Jesus on the left who he heals our wounds and forgives our sin. The sins that were committed against us that were not our fault, or the sins that we committed, he takes our guilt and our shame and he deals with it, which then he gives us a new identity, and he reminds us that we are forgiven, we are clean, we are never left or forsaken, we are adopted, we are beloved, we are powerful, we are being transformed, we are victorious. These aren't self-help, girl on Instagram, get yourself pumped up in a mirror statements. They're your inheritance in the gospel of Jesus Christ. They're true about you. And when you start to believe that they're true, you can live out your calling. Again, I don't need anyone's approval anymore because I'm approved by him. So I'm free to love people instead of use them to make me feel good about myself. I know he's my security, so I actually can get to a space of contentment financially. Whether I'm poor or I'm rich, I can live in a space of contentment. Because I'm worshiping Jesus, and then that leads to me, I can worship Jesus. I can live from his approval, not for the approval of others. And again, the fruit of my life to save time is the fruit of the Spirit. Now, what I want to do today is deal with the left, okay? All the way to the left, the unhealed wounds part of this, aka trauma, okay? Now, everyone loves trauma these days. Trauma's trending hard. Trauma's trending harder than Taylor Swift, okay? A lot of her songs are about made-up trauma. So there's a lot there. Now, some of it's real. I don't know. It's not my call, but she's got a lot of it, She's got a lot of betrayal going on, a lot of betrayal trauma. Now, so I have 4 points I want to hit today. Before we get into it, I want to say a couple things. One, I am a pastor. I'm not a licensed clinician, okay? I'm not a therapist, okay? But I have been trained by therapists, and they have told me this talk's legit. I have over 100 hours of trauma-informed care training that I've leaned into. I do understand trauma at a decent enough level to talk about it today. Two, I'm trying to make this accessible and keep people awake, which means we're not going to say everything that could be said about trauma ever, okay? I don't think I'm going to say anything that's not true, but I'm not going to say everything that is true about it. I'm also not going to use the most technical terminology that could be used to save you time, because it gets hot, okay? Not the sermon is hot, but like the heat in the room. And then lastly, as a church, y'all have a phenomenal teacher in Brad who loves teaching the Bible verse by verse. I aim to do that most of the time. This is a unique series. There's going to be a ton of biblical theology all over this thing. I'm only going to read like 8 verses, though. But there's a lot around the identity of Jesus, our image bearer, the fact that we're made in God's image, the fall, all that stuff. So I want to look at a couple different things. So I have 4 questions. Number 1, what is trauma? Number 2, is the concept of trauma biblical, which is a good question to ask if you're a follower of Jesus. Number 3, how does unhealed trauma keep us from loving others well, which is what this series is all about. And number 4, how can we increasingly heal from the pain of our past? All right, so number 1, what is trauma? I have 3 definitions. I've got a technical definition, I've got a practical definition, and I've got the best definition, the one I made up, all right? All right, so number 1, what is trauma? A technical definition. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration defines trauma as an event or circumstance resulting in physical harm, emotional harm, and or life-threatening harm. The threatening part's big. The event or circumstance has a lasting adverse effect on the individual's mental, physical, and emotional health, as well as on social and or spiritual well-being. All right, it's the technical definition. We also have what is trauma, a practical definition. This is from Kyle Spears, a Christian trauma clinician. He says it's a stored experience that disrupts a person's mental or spiritual resilience, whether conscious or unconscious, okay? Now, the third one, I don't have on slides. It's so fresh because it's off the top, you guys. It's tremendous. It's my definition. And trauma is this. It's an overreaction in the present to an underhealed wound from the past. It's got to have both of those. It's an overreaction in the present to an underhealed wound in the past. It's not just suffering in general, which we'll get into. It has to affect your present. Couple key important things to know about trauma. Not everyone who experiences a specific event will become traumatized. Just so you guys know, there's no such thing as a traumatic event. There are only potentially traumatic events that may or may not traumatize you. Some people can experience certain things and not have an ongoing effect tied to that thing. This is important because we've got a generation of kids who are told every 10 seconds they've been traumatized when they suffer, when they're suffering. They could be traumatized. You don't know. Time will tell. You hope they're not, but you don't want to tell them, you're jacked up for sure, which is what we do as a society. One Christian said we diagnosed away the entire human experience. Sometimes life is sad and hard. It's not just suffering in general. It's suffering that re-pops up in the present, especially when it's connected to relationships. Not everyone who's traumatized meets all the criteria for PTSD. Everyone in this room is traumatized to some level, most likely, but its impact on you is on a wide scale. Some of us, it's not that big. Some of us, it's massive, all the way to a PTSD, where our nervous system is significantly affected. Every person who's traumatized doesn't need special elements of care necessarily. Some people need a licensed clinician, and you need to do that. Some people just need friends to tell their story to and learn how to ground themselves, which we'll talk about. So both are valid. It all depends. So last thing I'll say is this on definition of trauma is, or just helping explain it, is our body plays a part in trauma. Okay, so trauma is not just an emotional state. Your body's doing a thing. So when your brain perceives a threat, the body secretes hormones that shut down certain systems and ramp up others. Shortness of breath, heart racing, digestive system shut down, muscle tension, all that stuff. Curtis Solomon, a trauma counselor, writes this. He says, God created humans with a threat detection and a response system that incorporates various aspects of the body. For instance, the brain has two parts that are involved. One part senses a threat and the other assesses it, okay? We often call this the fight or flight. A lot of people talk about fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Fight or flight is when you feel like you're in danger, the threat detection goes, you're in danger, do something. That's fight or flight. The response system takes a second, and that goes, is this actually a threat? Does that make sense? So when it comes to fight or flight, that's, you either want to, if you feel like you're in danger, you want to fight the thing, or you want to run from the thing, or you freeze. It's kind of like, I hope it doesn't see me. Or 4, you fawn. That's the idea. Too many F's again? Why are you laughing? Okay, all right, my wife's killing me. I'm traumatized from last week when she's like, it was too much, too many F's. But fawn would be when you don't fight or run away. You act agreeable because you don't feel safe. So oftentimes victims of sexual assault will experience this where they're like, I can't run away and I'm not strong enough to fight this person. If you've seen, maybe, I don't know, bank robberies or whatever. I watched a bank robbery movie recently. When the teller's like, hey, you're great at bank robbing, man. Look at you go. You memorized that code I gave you. You're so good at this. They're scared. They're like, I can't get out of here, and I can't fight this. So it's that type of thing. But those are all ways of going, I'm trying to get safe again. Now, after you experience, so the threat system is there. The threat detection and response are there. When the response system goes, hey, actually, you're fine now because the real threat is gone, or you realize it wasn't a threat in the first place, your body goes back to kind of homeostasis, like your heart rate calms down again, your stomach chills out, all that stuff. Yesterday, I experienced this. I was walking, I'm borrowing Brad's office. It's my office for July, I'm doing what I want to do in there. I'm painting it, doing my thing. Just kidding, I'm not painting. But I was walking out, and right as I walked out, a snake's head popped under the door, right there, that door, right? And I just saw this. Right? Terrifying, right? Terrifying. And instantly, right, my body did what it does. It's like, whoa, right? It doesn't even have time to think. Do I want to fight like Jesus and just stomp it on the head, right? Do I want to run away? It's just, I ran away. I ran away and I screamed, right? Now, what happened though, so my threat system's going. My response though popped up and was like, hey, chill out because it's a long gecko, which it was. Now again, this is so much scarier than this, right? He got stuck. He was trying to get through. So again, once my body was like, oh, it's cool, it was cool. Curtis Solomon talks about how, so when you experience a threat and you experience pain, your body basically learns from it. That's how God's designed our bodies. When little kids, they see for the first time blue fire, right, on a stove, and they reach to touch it. Either they touch it and they get burned, and their mind goes, don't do that again. Or their parent goes, don't do that. Right? You could get burned. What's burn? have you ever tried to describe things to kids sometimes? You're like, what's a burn? It like hurts. It's like getting stabbed. No, it's not getting stabbed. It's, it's like fire. What's fire? I don't know. Just get out of here, right? Just don't touch the stove. But either way, again, good parenting does that, by the way. It teaches you that something's dangerous without you having to experience the pain of it. That's good discipline. That's why it's loving to discipline your kids, to go, hey, I'm giving you a smaller consequence than touching the fire, getting hit by a car, whatever it is. I'm teaching you wisdom on how to live in the world. So you have these two parts of your brain that assess threats and respond. Now, the problem with trauma is trauma, when you're overwhelmed with fear or whatever it is, like you have this traumatic experience, what happens in the future is either a couple things will happen. One is when you have a legit threat, your body won't calm down. Your threat detector stays on. So well after something's revealed to not be, so someone jumps out and says boo, and it scares you, most people can calm down and go, oh, that's just Colton being funny, he jumped out. Where you're like, I need a while to feel better because of some stuff that's happened to me. Like, this isn't cool for me. Does that make sense? It also causes us to think things are dangerous that are not dangerous because they're similar to something that hurt us in the past. So an example of this would be if you were afraid of if you burned your hand and then you were afraid of stoves. As your brain develops and people talk to you, you learn, no, it's the fire, not the stove itself, right? You can imagine going to like Lowe's and you're like, oh my God, there's a gang of stoves to burn me, right? I'm gonna get jumped by these stoves, right? Now your brain starts to go, no, it's the fire, not the stove. Now again, trauma, it makes it hard to distinguish between external stimuli, between the things outside of you. So you're afraid of stoves and you don't need to be. And so you go, man, because I was hurt by a man, all men are dangerous. Or I was hurt in a church, I was spiritually abused. All churches or pastors are dangerous. Or I was hurt by my dad. Do you see what I'm saying? So again, that's what happens. And so it's an overreaction to an underhealed wound. Also, again, trauma as a term is way overused as a word in our society. Any Princess Bride fans? Anybody into that movie? Yeah? In that movie, over and over again, one dude says, you keep using that word, but I don't think it means what you think it means, okay? That's happening with trauma. It's not suffering in general. It's not going through a hard thing, okay? Super important. It's a past thing that is a present reality. Next big point I want to look at is trauma biblical? Is trauma biblical? Is the concept of trauma biblical? And the reason I bring this up is there can be an understandable skepticism amongst Christians when people use trauma as an excuse or as a cop-out for sinful behavior, right? Like, I just punch people in the face. It's my trauma, man. You're like, okay, well, we got to work on that, right? What's the deal with that? So what you need to know about trauma is it's not an excuse, but it's a helpful explanation. It's not an excuse, but it helps explain some things sometimes. Thing you need to know is understanding trauma should lead to more resiliency, not less. That's why there's so much dumb stuff on TikTok that makes people enslaved to their trauma because they don't know what they're talking about. When you understand, for example, like being triggered, that's when something reminds you of the scary thing from the past and you're afraid. Good trauma work makes you less triggered, not more. You don't use it. Does that make sense? A symptom of trauma, as we'll get into, is avoidance. So you're like, man, I'm so triggered. I just got to avoid all this stuff. It's like, no, that's a lack of resiliency. That might be where you're at right now, but you should be in process. That's not an end goal or an excuse. So understanding this should lead to self-understanding that leads to more resiliency and a deeper repentance of sin. I understand why I do what I do. Some of it's sin committed against me in the past. Some of it's sin in the presence of me trying to redeem myself and be self-reliant, those vows I talked about. So it's not an excuse. So is the concept of trauma biblical? Yes. I think I have a slide. Well, the word trauma is not found in the Bible. The concept is, okay? The word Trinity is not in the Bible, but the concept is. This idea of trauma, one of the things that I've loved in studying things like brain science or trauma is the idea that so often how the Bible, addiction, oh my gosh, the way the Bible describes reality is backed up the more we look into things scientifically, more, not less. Does that make sense? It's a really interesting thing. I do think trauma is there for a few reasons. For example, the traumas teach that we're embodied souls. That you're not a soul in a body and then the body disappears. You're an embodied soul. You'll always have a body, which is interesting to think about. You'll never encounter God without a body. Heaven, it says, Revelation says, we're going to have bodies in the new heavens and the new earth. Jesus, when he was resurrected, he had a body. This means stewarding our body matters for things like nutrition, all that stuff, gluttony, sleep, all that stuff. Also, we know that the way that we use our body, we can train our body to be slaves of righteousness or slaves of sin. And the more that we learn about addiction and neural pathways and dopamine and serotonin, all that stuff, we can say we can train our brain to become an enemy of God or a partner in helping us obey God. Does that make sense? So we have embodied souls. We're not Gnostics who believe all that matters is the soul, the body doesn't matter. We believe the body matters deeply. Jesus came in a physical body. He didn't have to. He could have come down like Casper the Friendly Ghost. He didn't. Communion, we take communion. That's a sensory embodied experience where we taste. Sometimes you go to churches and the bread's really good. You're like, Jesus, you're real, right? But on a serious note, when we taste the wine or the juice or the bread, we're intaking, right? A sensory experience. Throughout church history, things like incense have been used. We can go on and on. We're embodied souls. I think the church is kind of a bad idea for Jesus. Like, let's use really broken people who are in process and help them reach other broken people who are in process. It's like, you can do it all, Jesus, but he chooses to have other embodied people reflect the love of Jesus to each other. So if Kelly, after she asks me respectfully, says, can I pray for you? And she touches my shoulder, I'm experiencing something of the love of God through touch, through healthy, appropriate touch, through music. When I hear, does that make sense? Like there's a reality to this. So we're embodied souls. The scriptures also teach that we're called to love God with our entire being. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 through 2. Paul says, therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God, like in light of the gospel, I urge you to present your bodies, not your souls, your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true worship. But he links the body and the mind. Verse 2, do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will. Now in this passage, we have Paul calling us to present our bodies to God as an act of worship, and we're called to discern. And if there's anything trauma does, it keeps us from discerning things outside of us that look similar but are different. It also it makes it hard to discern when one trauma counselor says this. He says, trauma causes us to forget when we are, not who we are, when we are. So again, you kind of move back to that pain point, that wound. You feel like you're dealing with a person who's not there. I've had this in counseling session where it's like they're dealing with a ghost who's not in the room, but who used to be in the room. And people that they love now, their spouse, their kids, are receiving what maybe their parents or someone who abused them or whatever should have experienced. So Paul says to offer our bodies and to learn how to discern. Lastly, I thought this was incredible. The scriptures reveal Jesus ministering to people in a trauma-informed way. This isn't my idea, by the way. It would be epic plagiarism. I don't know whose idea it was, though. I know I was at a breakout one time at a training somewhere years ago, and the dude talked about this, and it blew my mind. And then I just looked up the idea, and I don't think it was the one I found. So, but it was really, really helpful. But in John chapter 21, Jesus is restoring Peter. And if you guys don't remember the story, Jesus, the night before he died, he said, Peter, you're going to betray me. He said, you're all going to betray me. But he said, Jesus, you're going to betray me. And remember, he's like, one of you guys is going to betray me. And it was Judas. And everyone's like, who's it going to be? Right? They're like whispering about it, like my kids at a Thanksgiving dinner. Who's going to get the extra piece of pie? Right? Like talking about it. And he's like, oh man, it's the guy, guy's dipping the bread. And then after that, Jesus goes, but you all are going to betray me. And then Peter goes on this rant, super self-righteous. He's like, I'm ride or die, Jesus. I will never leave you, right? I'm never going anywhere. These other cowards might leave, but I am ride or die. And Jesus goes, actually, before the rooster crows 3 times, you'll have denied me. He's like, yeah, right, man, right? I went to Israel a few years back, and I remember there's a church where they believed Caiaphas, the high priest's house was, where Peter would have denied Jesus, according to the account. And on the top of the steeple, they don't have a cross, they have a rooster. It's messed up, man. Your biggest moment of shame. Imagine he's like, thanks a lot. But Peter, outside of Caiaphas' house, next to a charcoal fire, the text says, he betrays Jesus. And he denies him not once, not twice, but 3 times. And it sounds pretty intense. Like, we don't have the full language, but scholars are like, he probably like kind of cussed Jesus out. Like, he probably looked him in the eyes and like was like, I don't blankety blank know that guy. Get him out of here. Like, it was intense denial. And you watch your partner just get taken. Your friend, partner in ministry, someone you're supposed to love, and you know he's being taken to a death unjustly, and you punked out. After you made a big old scene. It wasn't like, I told you I couldn't do it, Jesus. He made a big deal about it. And then John 21, and then don't forget, Jesus, he's crucified. A lot happened in between, which we'll talk about in a second. But he's crucified, then he rises from the dead. I want you to imagine how scared Peter would have been when Jesus rose from the dead, right? Dude, did this right before the cross, does short-term memory get erased? Remember he comes through? I don't know if you've ever had this before. You kind of have beef with someone, they show up at a social event, there's other people there. They can't get into it with you, but you know they know. You're like, dang, it's about to go down. And Jesus shows up. He's like, hey guys, you guys want to eat? What's up? And he comes in and they're doing their thing. Road to Emmaus, all that stuff. And then eventually there's this morning where we have 40 days where Jesus is resurrected, not ascended, walking around, and he sees Peter. Peter's fishing, and Jesus calls from the shore, Peter! Peter! Right? And he goes, hey, let down your net, catch a bunch of fish. He didn't even know it was Jesus at first. He's like, no, man, we already tried that. He's like, trust me. He's like, dude, I've been fishing forever. He's like, trust me. And he does it. And he comes in, and I want you to remember this. When Jesus calls Peter for the first time, he does the exact same thing. This account is so similar that some people are skeptical of the scriptures, being authoritative and from God. They go, oh, this is just sloppy editing. This is the same story kind of thrown in there twice. And disciple scholars said, no, it's making a point. It's here again. Jesus is doing something through repetition. So I want you to remember, Peter's moment was forever changed when Jesus is on a seashore, maybe the exact same one, definitely the same Sea of Galilee. And he said, hey man, here's how you catch some fish. And then he caught him after being out there all night. There would have been sweat, blood, visceral stuff. He's tired, all that stuff. He catches him. And now Peter is wondering, imagine how nervous he would have been. Are me and Jesus cool? Use trauma language. Are we integrated again? Is it safe to be with Jesus? Because I don't know if it is. And then Jesus re-invites him to follow him in the same way that he called him the first time, to say we are safe. I came to reconcile everyone, including you. But he does more than that. He brings him to the shore. And it's kind of a peculiar pick for breakfast, but he's making fish tacos. Jesus has a fire going, a charcoal fire. The charcoal fire at Caiaphas' house. So again, the sensory smell. One of the things with trauma, smells hit you. And again, one of the ways that you're increasingly set free from trauma is you can go, I'm in proximity to the thing that hurt me, but I'm okay. The thing of my biggest shame or pain is here, but it's different now. I'm safe now. I'm older now. I'm with safe people now. Whatever, God is who, all that stuff. And so the charcoal hits him. And then Jesus does this really weird thing. He doesn't go, hey, are we good? He asks him, do you love me? And interestingly, he asks him not once, not twice, but 3 times. We're not, Dr. Terry Wardle says, we're not wounded by words so much as we're wounded by episodes. We're wounded episodically. So there's a moment or an experience that wounds us. Maybe words are said. Meaning is made out of it. But we're also healed episodically when we have corrective experiences with Jesus and his people. And again, I just want you to see the gift Jesus gives Peter that then pushes him out into Pentecost. And he's still a messy cat. We don't have time to get into Peter. Like, he keeps jacking up. But eventually he doesn't, by the way. Eventually he is courageous and dies as a martyr. But man, I don't know about you, that's powerful to me. And Jesus does this all the time. He does weird stuff with people's taste and their vision and their hearing. Like he honors the dignity of their human bodies. There's a book on appropriate touch in ministry by a woman, I think named Lori. I forget her name. It's a very good book, but it's about how Jesus used touch in his ministry. Due to things like sexual abuse, we're afraid to use touch in an appropriate way. She's got some great stuff on how to do that, but she goes, touch is so vital. It's so healing when it's loving and appropriate. So you just see this with Jesus over and over and over again. He never just goes, you're healed, like there's dignity being given back or relationships being restored or an experience of God's love. So how does unhealed trauma keep us from loving others well? This is a shorter point. I've got, sorry, babe. I've got 4 ways: intrusions, avoidance, illusions, and intensity. Again, intrusions, avoidance, illusions, and intensity. So here's why this is important for this series. Why not dealing with your trauma? It's not just a therapeutic kind of psychobabble thing. It's a way to understand how our past impacts our present relationships. For example, intrusions. If you're having flashbacks or distressing thoughts, let's say you're on full-on PTSD, or you have thoughts often that are intrusive. There are other reasons for having intrusive thoughts, but if you're having them about something that did happen to you in the past, it often is PTSD. So again, we'd encourage you to get help. We'll talk about in a second. But if a person's constantly in that place, they often will either be defensive or they'll check out. Again, it's kind of the in the present version of fight or flight. They're getting argumentative when they don't need to, or they'll check out. I actually know someone who has seizures, and they're tied to trauma. It's not epilepsy. It's an extreme way of shutting down to escape. She experienced gnarly physical abuse as a child. You can see how it would happen. But either way, if you're getting really angry and defensive, or you struggle to be present and you kind of gloss a lot, it's going to be hard to engage with people. The second one is avoidance. This is the biggest one. We avoid reminders of the trauma that can lead to isolation, which can make it hard to develop relationships, right? So this is kind of the idea of triggers. Triggers are things in the present that remind us of the past. So for example, I'm not making light of any of these things. So someone laughed in the last service. I was like, I'm too funny. I don't want to be. That was a joke. You can laugh at that one. But this part's serious. On the 4th of July, for combat veterans, hearing fireworks going off. It's a great example. That sounds like gunshots. Now, again, most of them are able to come back down to a space to go, hey, no, it is fireworks, but it's really distressing. Depending on where you're at, you could actually have a response that you think someone's trying to shoot you. For me, man, I grew up in the hood, and I got jumped several times as a kid. And one time in particular, I had my Discman, my portable CD player, got jacked. Well, they tried to jack it. I fought for it. I kept it. But part of me that still wants respect for that. But they kind of broke it though. It was messed. The headphones broke. Whatever it was. I was a city bus. To this day, when people, I now live and work primarily in an upper middle class space. I'm still not used to it. So when people run up behind me, we got a lot of people like jogging. Women with strollers. I'm like, hey, and I'll make this noise. When I'm scared, I don't get like, I make that, and I go, oh, like it's just like it's not like I'm gonna kill you. It's just like, oh, and I just like charge. Okay. That's an example where I'm like, whoa, like I have multiple experiences where people started attacking me from the back, and now does that make sense? And Carol's like, what's going on? And you're like, it's fine. Just take your stroller and get out of here. It's not Brad's mom, you guys, don't worry. On a serious note though, right, like for some of us, the holidays are some of the most traumatic spaces, and so you don't want to do the holidays, right? Because holidays are supposed to be spaces of peace, and on paper, they're sold as this, but for a lot of us, because we expected something so special and received something so terrible, we don't look forward to those. And so we try to avoid them. And then when our GC's got holiday stuff going, we don't connect with people because we get really distant. We say we got a lot of work and we don't. We're alone. My grandfather, his dad abandoned the family on Christmas Day when he was 12 years old. My dad was like, I always wonder why he didn't like Christmas. I guess that's a good reason. When we did the genogram, I was like, yeah. That's there, right? So that keeps you from connecting. Also, I've worked with multiple victims of spiritual abuse and church burn, like really intense church burn. And with them, it's like, man, just worship music. it's like, uh-oh. They hear it. And it used to be a thing that made them go, oh, we're going to worship God, right? Now, after their experience being hurt by people at church in an unhealthy context, they hear worship music, and it's like the war drums in a battle back. It's like, they're here. Oh, crap, they're here. And they might do what they did to me in the past. And so literally learning to go, just because there's worship music, just because they're even singing the same song sometimes, just because guys preaching from the Bible, talking loudly, like Brad or other preachers are known to, that doesn't mean they're going to do the same thing. But it can feel very jarring, right? So again, avoiding things, which keeps us from, you avoid intimacy, you avoid shared memories, you avoid sharing emotion, you avoid speaking up, you avoid saying no, right? If I let someone down, I'm going to get rejected or hurt, all that stuff, which again makes our life very complicated. The next one's illusions, aka cognitive distortions, or what the Bible calls lies. Believing things usually about other people. Right? So like everyone is untrustworthy can prevent you from forming deep, trusting relationships, which is actually what you need to heal from betrayal. If you think everyone's going to leave me or everyone's going to reject me, all right? Again, I don't know if in the Emotional Healthy Relationships series, Jerry Scazzaro, she's like, when I stopped doing assumptions, I cut my sin in half. You guys remember that? Right? Very funny. Bad accent, but pretty funny. I think it's fairly true. Again, trauma impacts your ability to discern clearly, and you assume the wrong thing often. A lot of black and white thinking. They either hate me or they love me. And the truth is, it's more complicated than that. And the worst part about these assumptions is sometimes people will preemptively strike, kind of preemptively act, like they're going to reject me, so I'll just leave. Or I'm going to preemptively act ridiculous so that you'll reject me because the tension of waiting for it, the dread is too much. So I'd rather do something wild to see if you'll reject me. And I've seen this so often. This is one of the saddest points for me in church with community, seeing people act like this. And I had friends who worked in foster care, and they said, man, a lot of foster care kids who have been passed around too much in the system, they often will act out early, go, you're going to kick us out anyways, we might as well get it over with. And adults will show up to churches like that, and GCs like that, and romantic relationships like that. Does that make sense? And so again, it can be so easy. We have these beliefs, again, that we've made from the pain that we then bring everywhere with us. And then lastly is intensity, aka reactivity. This would be outbursts of anger or, again, hypervigilance. It's like you're always switched on, thinking you're in danger when you're not. And so you're in kind of fight or flight when you don't need to be. I mentioned this last week. If you're in a relationship that there's any chance is abusive in any way, we can't encourage you enough to reach out to the church. If you want to email the church at info@restoredla.com, if you don't feel like you can do that here in front of your spouse, like please let us know. If you want to talk, please let us know. We'd love to get you the help that you need. If someone's yelling at you all the time in your marriage, whether it's the man or the woman, they're yelling at you all the time or yelling at you in front of the kids or whatever it is, that's never healthy. But there is a distinction, I'll say, and you need help usually to discern this, so I can't encourage you enough to reach out to ask for help if that's your dynamic. There's a difference between someone yelling at you from a point of being an abuser, which is they enjoy hurting you, versus someone who they're yelling and they have outbursts and they feel really confused and sad and they don't trust themselves. Does that make it's different? Now, again, you need help to discern the difference. It's not the way you should be living, but it's really important. Again, I meant to say this earlier. Trauma is not our fault, what people did to us in the past. However, we are responsible to get the healing we need. So we can't use it as an excuse, or because people do try to use it as an excuse, even where there's legitimate trauma, but it's keeping them from growing and it's hurting the people around them, which again, it's making it hard to feel safe or feel loved. And which lastly, we'll just look at how can we increasingly heal from the pain of our past? How can we increasingly heal from the pain of our past? I've got a couple of gets. I've got get safe, get honest, get present, and get near Jesus. Get safe. I have a slide up here. It's called a trauma wheel from a trauma training I did. And did you guys see that? And it talks about this idea of a safe person, a safe place, and access to resources. A safe person is a person who listens well, doesn't offer quick advice, doesn't blame you for whatever's going on, listens. A safe place. This is a place that's, it could be a location or a community, but it's a place that's free from chaos. It's away from unhealthy people. It's pleasant for the senses, again, sensory in the way that remind you of the thing from the past that you might need help being exposed to walk into the future. And then access to resources, again, could be professional help. Any clinician worth their salts will tell you that you don't just need a therapist, you need a therapist, and if possible, a broader group of support. Not everyone has that, but if you have a couple of safe people in addition to the therapist, that's phenomenal. So again, if you need help finding a clinician, let us know. But not everyone needs a therapist to work through some trauma, so I just want to be really clear on that. But you need help. You're not going to heal magically. Number 2, get honest. This is telling our stories and acknowledging our pain. Telling our stories and acknowledging our pain. As we tell our stories, loving, empathetic voices can remind us what is true and what isn't. Again, one of our issues is our inability to discern clearly. One of the heartbreaks of sexual abuse in particular is people that are really good at sexually abusing. They groom victims and they train the victim to assume that they're a part of it, that they have shared responsibility. There's a multitude of reasons for that. One is they often don't speak up, which is not their faults, especially when they're kids, ever though. 2, their body feels good or a certain way, so they feel like I wanted this, and they're told and then 3, a lot of times it's someone that they care about or a family member, statistically. And so physical abuse is similar. It's a little bit different, but it's like you deserve to get hit. One of the things that can be so healing for victims of any kind of abuse is when they realize they're not crazy and it wasn't their fault. And again, it might sound like a meme, like Good Will Hunting, but like I've actually told people, hey, it's not your fault, and it means the world. Because then they can really start getting the healing they need because they didn't want to talk about it because they thought it was partially on them. And Jesus comes in and goes, hey, it wasn't, and I want to help you. I can remove your shame, and I can give you safety now. And so we need healthy community. So getting honest, we need people around us that can help us. I know men and women who struggle, and again, it shows up in different ways, who really struggle to date, and they want to be married. And they're good looking, and they're smart, and they have good jobs, and on paper they're like, I'd be a catch on the apps. However, my parents' marriage was a nightmare, and I'm terrified of repeating that. So that's keeping me. Do you see? And so to have people that can go, hey, again, it's triggering to think about marriage and dating all that stuff. We're here with you as you do it. You're a little nervous. We're coming alongside you as you step into something that you want but you're afraid of, that seems scary. But it's not true that you're going to have the same marriage necessarily as your parents. If you're asking these questions, you're not going to. But we don't see that. And then, last 2, I'll just say this. Get present. Again, one of the things that trauma does is it causes us to forget when we are. One of the gifts of our bodies is there can only be in one place at a time. So it's pretty in vogue these days to practice deep breathing. Everyone's doing it on Instagram. But again, it was God's idea first. And here's the magic. It's not a weird new age yoga thing. The magic of deep breathing is it reminds you, oh, I'm in this body. I'm in this body in this place. Which means I'm not in the place that was so unsafe, and scary. Does that make sense? Another helpful tool, a similar vein, is holding something in your hand with texture for the same reason. Engaging your senses. Oh, I'm here holding this thing that wasn't there. I'm touching the fabric of my shorts that aren't what I would have worn then. I'm feeling, does that make sense? Like I'm feeling myself here. And then you go, oh, and then you can start to do things like pray breath prayers. One of the things that gets pushed back with this kind of idea is this is new, it's a fad or whatever. Again, we didn't have the same language, but like we've had breath prayers in the church for about 1,000 years. You breathe in, Lord Jesus, thank you for your love. Over and over. Lord Jesus, thank you that I'm safe right now and I'm not where I once was. Does that make sense? That's so helpful. And so getting present, and sometimes you need people to help you do that. A lot of therapists will give you that tool, teach you how to do that. Then you can take it. I didn't charge you. You can use that for free. Deep breathing and texture always helps, although you may need more help than that. But again, it's a really helpful tool. And then lastly, and I can't emphasize this enough, it makes all the other stuff even possible, get near Jesus. I've gone a little over, but I really would like to talk to you about Jesus for a second as we close. Hebrews chapter 4, verses 15 through 16 says, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin. Therefore," or in light of that, "let us approach the throne of grace with boldness, so that we may receive mercy and grace to help us in our time of need." A friend of this church, Dr. Gary Brashears, he says his favorite definition of grace, biblically, he's a theologian, is help from outside of ourselves. And friends, when you're facing, there's a book called Waking the Tiger about trauma, and he talks about like when you face that tiger for the first time, it's scary, and you're going to feel like you're in need. Again, that vow, I know it sounds silly, like I'll never be disrespected. It feels like something you have to have because you don't want to go to that place again. But when you go face to face with that thing and you go, you know what, I'm going to face this and I'm not going to defend myself the way I normally do with sin and numbing stuff. I'm going to let myself be here, but I'm going to let the lion walk in to deal with the tiger. And here's the cool thing, man. When we're suffering or we're in pain, we want people that have two things. We want someone who can make it better, right? When you're in physical pain, you go to the doctor, like, I have no idea what this is, man. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe talk to someone else, right? That's not helpful. Even if let's just go different route. Let's say they're really empathetic. Man, I can imagine what that pain feels like. I've got nothing. It's not super helpful, right? We want someone that goes, I know what it's like, and I have power to help. And friends, Jesus, I think a lot of us know this, he has power to help, but he doesn't just have power to help, he understands. Like more than anyone you've ever met in your life. From the beginning of his life on earth, Jesus was in danger as a child. He's in the womb coming out. There's stuff going on around him. There's a king who feels threatened by a prophecy about this Messiah, and he has all these babies killed, which leads to Jesus and his family being political refugees, fleeing a murderous government across the border into Egypt. At around the age of 30, Jesus begins his public ministry, and those years are marked by suffering. Jesus' own family were mocking and ridiculing him, saying he was out of his mind. John chapter 8, people question the virgins. They kind of basically go, Mary cheated on Joseph. There's all these rumors about him. He grew up as a member of an ethnic minority of an oppressed group with no privilege or status under the Roman occupation. Jesus didn't even have time to grieve because of the constant flow of people seeking his help. Those in Jesus' hometown of Nazareth were so enraged by his correct claims to be the Savior, they tried to throw him off a cliff. Talk about feeling misunderstood by people who should get you. He knows what it's like to be misunderstood. The religious elites were jealous of him and plotted behind his back, which I know some of you have experienced. He was betrayed by his closest friends, including one of them, for 30 pieces of silver. He then is arrested and tortured for a crime he didn't commit. He was deprived sleep and food and water, and he was beat and mocked and carted back. He was stripped naked. Recently, I read some scholars that say it's not a stretch to say that Jesus was sexually abused in his nakedness and vulnerability, being touched and hit and groped, spit on, and mocked. He was absolutely physically and emotionally abused. Before he goes to the cross, he is whipped with a cat of nine tails, where his bone and muscle, the physical pain. I talked to a guy after service, an older gentleman. He was like, man, I forgot, like just because he's God, it's not like he doesn't feel the physical pain. I was like, he's God, like he felt it, like the sinew and the muscles. And then he still has to die for the sins of the world. Nails driven through his wrists, the humiliation, the shame. Jesus endured more potentially traumatic events than any of us, all while suffering for us. And so what I want to say is that, I'll say a couple things. Right now, I want to close. I have like three kind of responses. I'll call the worship team up. The The first response is this. I know there was a ton of information I hit today, and the goal isn't to become an expert in this. The goal is just to understand yourself more and understand how you show up the way that you do with people that you care about or you want to care about. Because you want to fulfill the great commandment. You want to love your neighbor as yourself and love God with everything. This might keep you from that. You might need to listen to the sermon again. You might need a book recommendation. You might need a referral to a licensed clinician. We'd love to help with any and all of that. If you want to talk at all about anything, I'd love to get you set up with whatever care you need to the best of our ability. Number two, I want to move us towards communion and just say that in communion, again, it's the sensory gift Jesus gives us where there's taste, where this body that might be fallen still, that has parts, things wrong with it, a nervous system that's threatened too quickly, remembers the one who suffered in our place, who understands us. He died for the sins we committed, but he also died for the sins committed against us to heal us. And so he takes away our guilt and our shame, and communion's a time to remember that. I can't encourage you enough to do that with people who you believe are safe. And then prayer counselors will be available on the side. I want to highlight the prayer, not the counseling. They're not going to walk you through all your pain or your trauma. But what they can do is pray for you and just remind you that God is with you in it as he calls you to next steps. He's there, and he cares about you. So Colton, will you pray into our time?
Jesus, we come as people who are in need. We have all different stories in this room, and you are the author and perfecter and finisher of our faith. And so, Jesus, we want to make space to invite you to speak into these areas of our life, whether they seem really big or they seem really small, that keep us from loving people like you and keep us from experiencing the love of Jesus. And so as we move into this time, would you, Spirit of God, speak to our hearts about areas of our life that are not yet in congruence with the truth, that we are deeply beloved children of God in Christ, and that we are vessels of the Holy Spirit to bring the message and the love of Jesus out to others. And so would you begin to make room in our hearts as we move into this time? Would you give us gratitude for a God who was called the Son of Suffering, who was acquainted with our grief, and not just that you were acquainted and a victim of it, but that you are also the overcomer of that, and that you are the one who has power to heal and power to save. And by the power of your words, dead men come to life, and things that are broken are renewed and healed, and areas where we have been lost, we can be found. And so, Jesus, thank you for all the work that you have done in the past, and we invite you to continue to do that work right here and right now as we experience our voices singing, our ears hearing other people, as we taste the representation of your body and blood that was poured out for us. Would you reach out and meet us where we're at, wherever we are today? In Jesus' name we pray.